Hey, this is going to be a little bit of a different post for chapter 177. Um, this ended up being a really tough chapter. I only got about halfway through and it was like 20 pages long, really long chapter. And it was soul crushing. It was just too much. And so rather than read it all, I'm just going to summarize it for you so that when these characters come up down the road, we'll have an idea of what happened. But I'm not going to post even the part of it that I read just because I don't even want to have to go back and edit it. So here we go. So the lady that Mrs. Chichester helped, who had, been destitute on the street and rejected and was starving to death, we find out her name was Lydia Hutchinson, and she was a vicar's daughter who received a pretty decent education, and so came to London to work as a teacher at a girls' school. The lady she worked for was Mrs. Lambkin, and Mrs. Lambkin was horrible, and she wasn't treated very well. But a student at that school, Miss Adeline Enfield, whose parents are a lord and lady, we don't ever find out what their exact rank is, but their nobility, kind of befriends her a little, but in a very manipulative way. She gets her to deliver clandestine messages to a guy she's having a flirtation with, and at one point tricks her into accompanying her to a meeting with that man on the pretense of going shopping, which wasn't at all what was going to be happening. So the guy that Miss Adeline Enfield was meeting up with is Captain Cholmondeley, who we met in the previous chapter, one of the people who recognized her. But he wasn't there alone because he had heard from Adeline that she was going to have someone with her. So he brought his friend Lord Dunstable, who's the one that recognized Lydia in the previous chapter, even though neither of them did anything to help her. So they met up, and Lord Dunstable was very flirtatious with Lydia, and she started to think, oh, he actually kind of likes me. No one likes me right now. And so it really fed into some vulnerabilities and insecurities she had there. Adeline arranges for them to meet up again. And because she's felt very flattered, both by the friendship she has from this girl from a noble family and the attention she got from this lord, she is willing to go again, even though she's kind of against her better judgment. There ends up being a rainstorm. They go back to the captain's house. She gets drunk and wakes up the next morning. So you can fill in the details there. But Lord Dunstable insists that he's going to marry her and he loves her, and it's just a matter of getting his affairs in order. And it's enough to assuage her worries on this score. And because she believes him, she continues every now and then to go with Adeline to meet up with these guys. So you can imagine where this is going, right? So after this has been going on for a little while, suddenly a note comes from these two guys saying, hey, we're off to the continent. Don't know when we're going to be back. Don't even have time to stop by and say goodbye. We're out of here. And so, of course, Lydia starts to realize that maybe this was all a ruse. Maybe there was never any marriage in the picture, especially because he never brought it up. If she brought it up, he would kind of tiptoe around it with vague promises and then move on. So she's starting to recognize that she didn't approach this the right way. One night after the men have left, Adeline comes up to Lydia's room, and Adeline is pregnant and in preterm labor. She delivers a stillborn child, and Lydia promises to keep her secret. Well, it becomes known in the school, to the headmistress, really not generally, but to the headmistress, that the child was born, a stillborn child. And because of circumstances, the headmistress believes that it's Lydia's child. And Lydia keeps the secret to save Adeline from being caught out and being disgraced and all of that, because this is her friend. Well, obviously, she loses her position. She gets fired and sent away. Adeline is like, oh, I'm going to help you out. Don't worry about it. You saved me. I'm going to save you. And she arranges for Lydia to get a job as a governess with a family who is kind of vaguely connected with Adeline's family. Well, the husband in that household is kind of a lecherous sort and takes a liking to her. And when she rebuffs him, he tells his wife that she has been coming on to him. And so Lydia loses her job. And she's thinking, you know what, I should just go home. There's nothing here in London for me. I should go back to my dad and to my brother because I was happy there. I'm sure they'll take me back, even though I've had a falling from grace, as they would say at the time. But as she's getting ready to do that, she crosses paths with who else? Lord Dunsford. He, seeing the desperateness of her situation, talks her into believing him again when he says, no, I do love you. I will marry you. It's just that my dad won't approve. So I'm waiting for him to knock off so that I can marry who I want to. And Lydia, being both desperate and lonely and scared and susceptible because this guy shows her attention she doesn't get anywhere else, believes him and essentially becomes his mistress. All the while, though, she's assuming he is going to make good on his promises and they will get married. Then word comes from her home village that her father is very, very ill and she needs to return home right away because there's no time to lose. So she scrawls out a note to Lord Dunsford, telling him, I have to go back home. I have to go see my father. I should have done this all this time. I'm leaving for good, basically. And she doesn't take with her anything from the house, any of the valuable things. She just packs her clothes and goes. By the time she gets back to her home village, her father has already passed away, so she missed seeing him, which of course breaks her heart. Her brother manages to get out of her the history of her situation, what happened to her in London, and she ends up being very forthright with him and feels a burden off her soul by sharing this. And the next morning when she gets up for breakfast, her brother is gone, which is strange. And she's like, oh no, is he mad at me? Like, what's going on? She gets a letter, I think it's like the next day or something like that, from a physician, a surgeon in London saying, your brother came into my practice. He had been shot in a duel and he is dead. Her brother went and challenged Lord Dunsford to a duel. That is his name, right? I get that right. Dunstable. Dunstable to a duel to uphold her honor, and was shot in the chest and died. And Lord Dunstable has left London for the continent. Which is what tended to happen after a duel if someone died. Like they'd kind of take off to let the things blow over. So she packs up all her stuff, sells what little remains of the family's estate, and it amounts to like 60 pounds or something. It's not very much, and heads to London to go see the physician who had attended to her brother and get the story of what happened there. So she does, and she's able to stay with that family for a little while she tries to get her feet under her, but she can't find a job because the headmistress of the school who let her go obviously isn't going to give her a character reference, and neither is the lady whose husband accused Lydia of being no better than she ought to have been. And eventually, Lydia reaches the point where she's destitute. She has no money. She's behind in her rent. She hasn't eaten. She has nothing. So she goes to see Adeline, who had been her friend, and says, I need help, whatever. And Adeline is just haughty and dismissive and is like, you are so far below me. I repaid you by getting you that job. It's not my fault you lost it because you're no better than you should be. I mean, all the things that Adeline knows isn't true, but she's just blowing her off because basically she's like, that got taken care of. And says, and there's no point in you telling people anything about me because they won't believe you. And you say anything about me, I'll tell everyone about you and it will destroy you. So she's in this tough situation. She's penniless. She's bankrupt. The landlady kicks her out of her apartment because she can't pay the rent. She's literally on the street and homeless, collapses in a doorway, exhausted and starving, and wakes up the next morning having been taken in by someone who she finds out that her name is Mrs. Harpy. And Mrs. Harpy feeds her and takes care of her. She goes to the apartment where Lydia had lived and gets her stuff back by paying the money that she owes the landlady. And Lydia's like, oh my gosh, how can I ever repay you? And she's like, oh, I know it'll take a little while. And Lydia's like, oh, but I feel bad because you put so much money out. And she's like, that's okay. Just, write me an IOU and we'll be fine. It doesn't take very long, though, before Lydia realizes the house she's in isn't a regular house, it's a brothel. And Mrs. Harpy is a madam. So she realizes this and is like, oh my gosh, I have to get out of here. You have to let me go. And Mrs. Harpy says, I have your note here saying that you owe me money. That you try to leave, I will bring in the police and the constable. And so she's in this terrible situation. She realizes she can't get out. She's stuck there. And Mrs. Harpy brings in the first customer, if you were, that she's meant to take in. And it's who else? Lord Dunstable. And she is, of course, angry and she's frustrated, and he is angry in return, and they have this argument. He storms off. She's feeling absolutely devastated because the one person who had been kind to her in some way is now showing his true colors, and she's realizing just how desperate her situation is. It's quite a while that she's trying to get out of this this house and this situation. She can't, and things are getting worse and worse and worse, and she's more and more indebted to this madam, which is how these brothels tended to work. They would trap them. Finally, she basically runs away with just the clothes on her back and absolutely nothing. But that, of course, puts her on the street in just as bad of a situation, and in many ways worse than what she had there. And so by the time we catch up to her in the previous chapter, she's at her wit's end. She's sold everything she can. She's starving. She's dying. Lord Dunstable and Captain, what was his name? Cholmondeley see her as she's passing the club window, and Lord Dunstable recognizes her and feels that pang of, oh my gosh, I used to know her and look what's happened. But neither of them try to catch up to her and help her out. And that's when she's found by Mrs. Chichester. So that is her history. And like I said, this is like 20 pages, and it's told in such detail that the further I got into it, I just heavier and heavier and heavier. And I got to where I couldn't finish it. And I didn't want to have to edit it to post even what I had read. So that is her history. I suspect we're going to learn more about Lord Dunstable and Miss Adelaide Enfield and all of that. But that is her background. So there you go. That is a summary of chapter 177. We had to skip 2 different chapters this week. I don't always know what to skip because what makes people uncomfortable is different. And I mostly tend to go by, do I want to even keep reading this? And could I bear to actually edit this? And if the answer is no, then I skip it. So 2 skipped this week. I don't know what next week will end up being like, but I'm hopeful that we're going to have a positive, upbeat chapter next, or at least soon. All right, see you for the next chapter.